Good morning. My name is Marcia White, and I am president of the College at St. Rose. I am pleased to introduce to you today our opening speaker, Sister Joan Lescinski, CSJ, PhD. I'm incredibly proud to be the interim president of the College at St. Rose, and though I've led organizations before through difficult times, this is my first rodeo as a college president. Serving as a trustee at St. Rose for more than 20 years, one of my greatest blessings has been to have the opportunity to not only learn from a master, but to build a friendship that I cherish with Sister Joan. Sister Joan Lescinski has left an incredible legacy at every college she's touched. From her 19 years as a professor of English at the College of St. Rose, where she earned her bachelor's and master's degree in English literature, then PhD from Brown University. She served as vice president of academic affairs and dean of Fontbonne University, associate dean of academic affairs at Avila University. But God had other plans and spoke through some very wise leaders who called her into service as president. She led St. Mary's of the Woods College from 1998 to 2007, moving the college to enrollment records, new academic programs, robust strategic and master plans, and a capital campaign that far exceeded its goals. She then arrived at St. Ambrose University in Iowa in 2007, becoming its first sister president and first female president, serving for 13 years. Again, she added new programs, spearheaded new facilities, and launched new partnerships that met the needs of the times. Since 2007, the endowment at St. Ambrose grew from $40 million to $170 million. Apparently, Sister Joan never gets tired. Sister Joan serves on the boards of the College of St. Rose, Mount St. Mary's University, and is a trustee for the Higher Learning Commission and the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. She also acted as a guide to students from ACSSJ schools on the 2018 Le Puy student pilgrimage, and will be a guide at our next student pilgrimage in 2022. Sister Joan is an example of the Sister of St. Joseph and a president in higher education who is definitely meeting the needs of the times. We know that St. Ambrose must have been heartbroken when Sister Joan announced plans to retire this year. But she can always be counted on to share words of wisdom and context, especially in the toughest of times, because she is an expert leader and she is always there to find the future. Today, she will has a great deal to share with us, and will do so. We are very grateful to have Sister. There'll be time for question and answers following her presentation. And Sister Rose, I couldn't be happier. Sister Joan, I couldn't be happier.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say thank you to you, Marcia, for your gracious introduction. It's a privilege for me to serve on your board of trustees at St. Rose. And thank you to Martha for inviting me to be part of this ACSSJ conference. I feel privileged to be here. We all know, of course, that these past 16 months have been like no other in anyone's experience, not only for our colleges and universities, but in our personal lives, the lives of our families and our circle of friends. All of them have been impacted, some of them tragically. I don't know how many of you have lost dear ones to COVID, as we certainly have in the Sisters of St. Joseph, but I venture to say that many here have. As I write these words in early May, we do have now signs of hope that we are moving through the great darkness of what COVID brought us into light, slowly, little by little, and by no means fully. We take steps toward recovering what we say in the church is our ordinary time, returning to a normalcy that may never fully look like the way we remember it. And through it all, we have remained committed to our ministry of higher education. We all carried on. We did not stop. And as I was reflecting in preparation for this gathering, some pieces of our CSSJ history came into my prayer. Let me share a few of those with you. Our first sisters, as we all know, came together in 1650 in France. It was, as the historians among us note, a time of political unrest, of great poverty and disease, and many unmet needs in society, and great uncertainty. It certainly was not a promising time to begin a religious congregation, especially one of apostolic women, when the church at that time preferred that women religious remain in a cloistered life. But the Spirit called those women from various parts of Southwest France, and the Spirit moved Jean-Pierre Médaille as he encountered them on his preaching ministry. And something remarkable, something grace-filled happened. Our little design was born. What a modest way to describe us, our little design. The sisters heard a call, and then, asked later by the city of Le Puy, they moved into an orphanage and met those needs, and more needs, dividing the city, and doing, as the early documents say, all of which woman is capable. Now we can fast forward to today. No one listening to me today is here by accident. We might have applied for a position or fallen into a task needing to be done, taken a position because it was there, dreamed of working at a particular institution where we find ourselves. Whatever our presumed reasons, we are not here by accident. We are meant to be here, called to be here. And so we meet the needs of our colleges and universities by providing all kinds of services, teaching, interacting with colleagues, planning, dreaming, looking out for students who might otherwise fall through the cracks or who have special needs, dividing what is the little city of our own institutions. Our first sisters, we know, came from several parts of the Diocese of Le Puy. They did not know one another, and their ages spanned 30 years. But they created a community just as we have always done, with one another, with our students, with the college and university community. We continue to weave the little design just as our first sisters wove lace. What motivates us? I think it's exactly what motivated the first 6 sisters. God's call to serve, to be with the dear neighbor, to love fully and generously. It's that simple, I think. It may not be easy, of course, but it really is that simple. God's call to us. We see our individual and collective call is to help bring, as we say, neighbor with neighbor, neighbor with God, as the consensus statement reminds us. All those who comprise our colleges and universities are our dear neighbors. and we are committed to them. In these times of unrest, we have made the well-being of the dear neighbor our first priority. We've been asked to meet needs during this pandemic time for which we were all largely unprepared, for which we had little experience, and for which we definitely had no playbook to guide us. And we've done so daily, monthly, searching for the more, the next challenge, and always for the good of the dear neighbor. Every time is the time we have been given. This past year offered significant challenges which all of us here could enumerate. But let me just mention a few. A key challenge for all of us has been the uncertainty, the anxiety, and the fear which has been with us as the pandemic spread. We were, and are now, the calming agents, needing to mask our faces as well as our own fears and anxieties as we reassured our students. We said to them things like this: follow the precautions, and we will do everything we can to keep you safe. Safeguard your own safety and that of everyone else on campus or in your tiny circle at home, and we will be here for you. Do your best, and we will do our best. That's what we told them in so many different ways. And we counted on the grace of God and our legacy of serving the dear neighbor to see us through. And by and large, I think we can all say it has. And in these times, our students, who after all come to college in order to explore their independence, have looked to us for reassurance.
It's nice to be at a conference doing other things.
I know.
It's like so good. Me too.
They look to us for reassurance, and we have offered it, even when we ourselves were anxious and fearful. Like the first sisters, we went where we were needed, offering calm, presence, and sometimes tough love. Those sisters in Le Puy would have known exactly what we were doing and why, and they would have been proud of us. Another challenge we have met is the uncertainty of time. As we all know, as academics, we live by predictable schedules, semesters, breaks, holidays, academic years. That's how we arrange our lives. That's what I've done for 50 some years. And COVID upended all of that. Not caring that graduation has always been at a certain time. Not caring whether a course could be taught in a drastically reduced schedule. Not caring about any of those things. And here we are, weary for sure, but here. We made it work. And I might add, I think we'd all agree, along the way, we developed some new skills. This is a good example. New ways of interacting, new ways of forming community. This pandemic has been a dreadful, tragic interruption to our normal lives, but we have received unexpected gifts. A third challenge has been the temptation to focus only on the now, at the risk of losing sight of a bigger picture. The city, the one we divided, is not the world. As educators, we know that the world must become our city. This is the message we must always deliver, even now, when it is tempting to focus on our own little plot of land. This is, after all, the goal of education, leading out as the root word tells us. A final challenge, although each of you could add many others, has been the temptation to let go of the very reflection, meditation, quiet time, and prayer which called us to this ministry in the first place. We all know the old saying, the urgent is the enemy of the important. And these months have been incredibly filled with the urgent, haven't they? I do not for a moment reject the urgent. It has consumed my time as it has consumed yours. But unless we continue to make space in our lives, we will not have the inner strength to continue to address the urgent and plan for the bigger picture. Quiet time, contemplative time, retreat time. These inner spaces refuel and renew us. They are critical to our well-being so that we can help the well-being of others. You all know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but it bears saying again. As I said, I know you could add your own challenges, but these might serve as starters for our discussions these days. How do we minister and lead in a time of pandemic? We do our best. We all know that colleges and universities like ours could be on an endangered list, but we will do our best. Interestingly, for me at least, we know little about the ministerial successes or failures of our first sisters. They did their bests, and somehow God provided what still might have been needed to meet the needs of their city and their time. We do know that the first two foundations in 1836 here in the United States, one thrived, Cahokia, or Carondelet, and one did not, Cahokia. But we remember and we honor both, realizing that both are part of our story. And perhaps that's a good example of what all of us experience. Those efforts we make in ministry that seem to go beautifully and fruitfully, and those where we cannot see the fruit of our labor, wonder if we've gone off in the wrong direction. So let me conclude. We gather virtually at this conference to remember why and by whom we were called, to affirm that call to divide the part of the city where we find ourselves in ministry, to take time for prayer and reflection, and to realize that we have a rich and precious legacy that we share. We know that some legacies are measured in dollars. Ours is priceless. It is a privilege for me today to help us celebrate it together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Joan, and welcome everyone. My name is Sharon Rad. I'm an associate professor in organizational leadership here at St. Kate's, and we're so grateful that you're joining us today, Sister Joan, and sharing your wisdom and really inspiring thoughts as we think about the times that we're in right now. I want to invite people to bring your questions and comments into the chat, and we'll be moderating those. And I'm going to kick things off with a question for you, Sister Joan. And as I said, I'm a leadership professor, and we really think that leadership development is about self-development. And I appreciated so much, both in reading your bio as well as your presentation, the long list of accomplishments that you have in your career, combined with an extraordinary humility that you bring, and the way that you look to history to guide us as we look at the times that we're in. I'm wondering if you're willing to share a more personal story about what you found to be really challenging in this last year and how you've used these lessons from history to guide you in your decision making.
Certainly. Again, my responses, I think, are going to be echoed out there by many of the people listening to this. Some of the hard parts, I think, were letting go of those things we treasure so much. And most of it had to do with our being together in our university community. I had to, the toughest decision, I could say this, that I had to make in all these months was, I can remember the date exactly, it was April 2nd. And I said, I'm going to have to cancel spring graduation. We all know what graduation means to our students, what it meant to all of us in our careers. It was an affirmation of success and really bringing together of not just our own efforts, but the support of so many people. And we see that at our commencements with our students every year. And I've been to, I think I counted them up, 76 graduations in my lifetime. And I only remember one really good commencement speech. So that's just something to remember for me. But one of the things that's so hard is it took away not only that affirmation of each of our wonderful students, but the affirmation of those little communities around each student which supported them. And I don't know about your institutions, but mine here has a lot of first generation students, even as I was a first generation student myself. And what it meant to my family when I graduated from college, I will never forget. Both my parents were children of immigrants, and none of them had any opportunity to go to college. So their dream was all their children would do so, and we did. But canceling that really just cut me to the chase because I knew the cost it was to our students. We had to cancel the December one as well. And boy, I tell you, when we did that one, I say, whatever it takes, we're going to have a spring 2021 graduation. And we did. And like many of you, it took a very interesting form. It wasn't virtual, it was in person, but a really interesting in person with all the social distancing and masking that was required. But it was those sorts of losses, Sharon, that really cost me. I think you heard me reference in my speech that we had to be calming presence and all that sort of stuff. And we sometimes had to bring tough love. I remember meeting with the student leaders last summer virtually saying, okay, we're bringing everybody back because we could in Iowa to campus, but it's going to be a whole new experience. All the buildings will be locked down. The campus will be locked down and it will be very strict. And that's not what college kids come for, a strict experience. But if they wanted to come, and they wanted to come, and they told us that in the surveys we sent out, that we would have strict rules and there would be a chance for a verbal warning if you disobeyed them, a chance for a written warning, and then I would dismiss you from school, by the way, with no refund of your tuition. Mm-hmm. And when we set those rules up, and the student leaders helped us articulate all of those, one of the young men said, now, sister, I know you don't like violent terms, he said, but I'm going to use one because I think you need to know this, that we might have to put a pike on a head or two at the beginning of the year so people know we're serious. I said, well, I'll skip the image, but I know what you're saying to me. And sure enough, within the first 2 weeks of school in August, we had 3 young men flaunt the regulations once, twice, and on the third time, I sent them home. And said to them, you will be welcome in the spring if you can adhere to the rules we have, which are meant only for the health and safety of everybody. Right. Those are 2 of the examples I would use, Sharon. And again, I know everybody in the audience could multiply them again and again, but notice what they all are. They're all about relationships. The one, a great loss through the celebrations that we would have, not only of our students, but all of our faculty and staff who retired last year, and the lovely ceremonies and rituals we have, all of that had to be done virtually. And then having to send students home because they couldn't or wouldn't stand by the safety measures we put in place, a fracturing of a relationship, if you will. Those were the hard things for all of us. What I take great comfort in is I was surrounded by an incredible faculty and staff and cabinet and board of trustees who stood by me as we made those decisions. But those were really tough. I can say some more, but I think that would get the point across.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the focus on relationships. And I'm bringing back in the comment that President Roloff made in her opening, and thinking about being a good Samaritan and how we're good Samaritans on campus and our campus communities to one another. You know, our campus sits in St. Paul. I'm over in Minneapolis, and right in the middle between us is where George Floyd was murdered. And so I'm wondering, as you're thinking about, you know, the challenges of these times, and how much our attention, our collective attention, has been drawn to really the horrible instances of racism and violence that have occurred. Where are the lessons servicing for you in relationship, and particularly thinking, right, about the really robust history of the sisters, and what that brings to us to this time in relationship to race, and how we care for the dear neighbor, and really attend to the scourge of racism.
Sure, be glad to. And then I noticed there's a question from Barbara McCormick. So after I respond to this one, if you
We'll
allow
get
me,
there.
I
Yeah.
will respond to that one.
Yeah.
We too, as the whole world was, and rightly so, just shocked and almost to the sense of despair at the murder of George Floyd and the others, as their names became household words for all of us. Martyrs, if you will, to this terrible systemic oppression that has been part of our history as a country, not as a, well, part of our history as a country, the United States of America, since before our founding. And I was touched that the president today started us out with a recollection of the lands on which all of us sit. That our indigenous people, and we're doing the same sort of thing here at St. Ambrose that you're doing at St. Kate's in honoring the indigenous people here, the Blackhawks in our case. But that part was extremely difficult, and it was really very interesting. Shortly thereafter, there was a desire to hold a prayer vigil, if you will, in a park which is contiguous to our campus. And there was real fear that there might be violence there. And so what we did was we invited all of those people who wanted to attend that to come and park their cars at St. Ambrose. And we'd have security people there making sure that they were safe parking their cars there, and if they wanted to be escorted over to the park. And then we talked with our local police, who are very good to us here at St. Ambrose, and pleaded with them to be present, not so much as police, but as Davenport citizens sharing in the prayer service that was going to go on. It was extraordinary to watch what happened. The people came in droves. Again, we made sure they could park in safety and be escorted and over and back. And the police knelt in prayer with the people in the park. Now, that wasn't all because of what we did. Many, many others were calling on people to do that. But I think it inspired many in our community, including local students, because the students from afar, of course, weren't there this summer. But it has carried over as our own diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts really have taken on a whole new meaning on our campus. I think as our hiring practices have changed, as our care of our students from diverse communities has become more a part of who we are. And all of that, I think, has helped us deal with an issue which is not going away, which is a part of us, going forward, as we say about all of our efforts, this is just another step. This is just another step. We have a long, long journey to go. So I hope that made some response to your question, Sharon. Is that all right?
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you
okay,
so much.
sure. Let
So
me
I
go
want
back,
to,
back to Barbara's question, if I may. Is that all
yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
And then you'll watch these, right? And then
Yes, yep. No,
okay,
we've got a whole group of
okay,
people watching the questions.
okay,
Yep.
good.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
so Barbara asks, what measures or steps did you take to ease faculty and staff back to campus, in person on campus? What activities did you do with them? That's a really terrific question. Again, something everybody has faced. As you would imagine, in that second week in March, we sent everybody home, and we furloughed a lot of people. Happily, we were able to bring them all back, and happily the government benefits helped everyone so that no one suffered financially, but for which I was deeply, deeply grateful. But everybody was at home, and I used to come every day to my office because I have a little separate entrance and work here and go home for lunch and go back, and never saw anybody, of course, in person. But in April, we knew if we were going to try to open in the fall, we're going to have to bring people back in the fall. And so we surveyed our faculty and staff and said, what do you need to be able to come back and feel safe in the fall? And they wrote very, very, we did some checkoff stuff, but we really wanted the comments to understand where people were coming from. And by and large, what we heard is what all of us have heard, which is we need to know you will have taken the steps that are necessary to make the physical environment safe for us to be in a classroom or in an office, or for our coaches to be working with our student athletes. And all of those things were part of what we gave to a wonderful group we called the implementation team. And we were helped by the fact that we have a master's in public health at St. Ambrose University. So on my faculty, I have 2 epidemiologists. So we had our own Dr. Fauci's, if you will, on campus to help us do those specific sorts of things. For instance, we've put in, as many of you have, the air filters that you use for hospital level filtering all over our campus. We put up all the plexiglass and all of those things that everybody needed, and put the mask requirements, spread out the classrooms so that everybody was socially distanced in a classroom, and did the things that faculty and staff said would make them feel at least reasonably safe and reasonably comfortable to come back to campus. Was everybody happy about coming back? No, and I know that, and urged people to come and express their concerns to me, which we did. And wherever we could, we accommodated those concerns. But we, like all of you, are built on personal relationships with our students. And only some of that can be done virtually. And we know that. And our students wanted, that's what their surveys told us, both the returning students and the incoming students, please bring us back to campus. And we did. And again, we had a few COVID cases during the year with faculty and staff, and a few with students. But when we did our contact tracing, we realized that not a single case could be traced to the university. All of them happened elsewhere. So those are some of the things we did. Are there people who are still afraid and worried? Of course there are. Now, of course, with vaccines, the fear is that you could feel it's palpably less as we all get vaccinated. Probably you're going to ask, are we requiring it? No, we're not requiring it. Partly because in the state of Iowa, the governor has issued a proclamation saying you can't require it. But what we're doing is what we've been doing, which is strongly encouraging people to get it, and then using ourselves as examples to say, I and all of the cabinet and all of the deans and all of the, people group after group have been vaccinated. So those are some of the things we did to help people feel safe. Barbara, I hope that response to your question. So Sharon, I'll turn it back to you to tell me what the questions are next.
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of continue on this line. And we have a question around this idea that, many people are anxious to get back to normal. But we know that the last 15, 16 months have actually been so profoundly disruptive to whatever normal was, that it's changed us, and it's changed us as individuals, and it's changed the way we interact with one another. And that perhaps, even as you said in your talk, that what used to be normal may never be again. So as we're thinking about that and what lessons we can learn from this and what we can take away and how we might use this experience really to inform us in creating a better world, what are your thoughts about, how, what aspects of this experience that we should actually continue? In particular, the question from the audience is, how do we allow those who cannot participate in person to still be involved? So I'd invite you to answer that question and then think more broadly about, what important lessons, shifts did we have to make that we should really hold on to?
I think the fact that all of us are now at least reasonably comfortable doing what we're doing right now, which is meeting virtually,
Mhm.
should enable us to meet the needs of people. I'm chuckling because I live in Iowa where there's a lot of snow. Not as much snow as in upstate New York, Marcia, but there's a lot of snow. Okay. And what we've said is there won't be any more snow days, because if we can't do classes on campus, every class, and every faculty member knows this, must now have the ability to go virtual at a moment's notice. And the ability, if there is a case of a student who's ill, to be able, or injured or hospitalized or whatever, to be able to continue his or her studies virtually. So I think we're going to have ways that make the loss of instructional time maybe go close to non-existent. And I know there's some hands-on stuff like labs and so on that do have to be done in person. But for the most part, I think we're going to eliminate the fact that you can't get to class because the weather is bad, or even because you're not feeling well. Some of the lessons I think that we're going to take forward from here do have to do with, I'll just use the advancement area if I can. I know we've been talking about students and putting all our attention on them, as we should, since that's why we're here, is to serve students. But I remember when, a year ago, March, my vice president for advancement and I said, well, there goes the fundraising world. And yet that's not true. We turned out to raise more money in our annual fund last year and are on par to do it again this year than we've done in any of our years before. And our capital processes didn't get hurt either, because what we discovered was that people, our alums and our donors from around the country, even around the world, now can reach out to us and we to them in ways with ease that we never could before. I've seen face-to-face, or if you will, virtual face to virtual face, more alums and donors in the last 15 months than I've ever done in any given 15-month period in either of my presidencies. And I think part of it was, and maybe will continue to be, people are not traveling as much. And they're still a little anxious about having people travel to them, but they're starved for connection, and connection with things they care about, in this case, our own institutions. And so I have been able to reach out, not just in a fundraising way, but one of the things I did early on was call our advancement area and say, tell me how many alums we know are over 65 and living alone. And let me just make some calls and Zooms. That was a ministry I didn't know I had, and it was stunning. And so I guess I would say to the advancement and alumni areas, folks, you've got whole new ways that you can reach out now to the people who care about you. People often say to me, don't you hate asking for money? I said, I never ask for money. I ask for people to join us in supporting a mission we all care about. And that's very different from saying to somebody, take your checkbook out. And it's, I think those are some of the lessons we will carry on. For instance, in our Board of Trustee meetings, I've had 100% attendance of my board for the last 15 months. And that's never true. And some of it now is hybrid. And the last one we just did in April, a little more than half of the folks were there physically. But I think we will find ways now to have new connections, and back to that word we care about, new relationships, or the buttressing of relationships that we never thought about before.
Mhm. So there's another question that's really fairly related to what you have just said, and I think I think you might have a bit to add to in your response to this question. So the question really is thinking about how, and I don't have a Catholic background, so I might say this improperly, and I invite you to
Don't worry.
correct my pronunciation. How important was our CSJ charism? Did I say that? Is that right?
Perfectly. Couldn't say
Okay.
it myself.
I've been hanging around long enough,
That's right.
apparently. How important was the charism as you helped St. Ambrose increase its endowment so dramatically? Like, in what ways did it, did it inform you and inspire you? And you've talked about some other ways that you helped the endowment increase so dramatically, but anything else you want to add about that?
Well, if I think about the, well, you've also got to say everybody who's managing an endowment, the market's been very, very nice to us of late. So I have to give some credit to the endowment, or to the market, but mostly to the folks who helped us raise money. One of the ways we increased our endowment was to emphasize endowed scholarships. That's something that's not at all hard to sell. When I'm talking to any donor of any means, I say to them, you know, something else you might want to consider also is endowing a scholarship. And then I just go on to use my own story about the fact that I couldn't have gone to college without a scholarship. And look what that education has opened up for me in my life. But our CSJ charism, I think that notion of uniting neighbor with neighbor and neighbor with God really is not, what would I say, unique in helping ACSSJ institutions. It's helped both of the institutions where I've served as president. One that was founded and is sponsored by the Sisters of Providence, and one which is a diocesan university where I am now. But that notion, and I go back again to the wonderful image of using the Good Samaritan, that reaching out to the dear neighbor. And at St. Ambrose, you know, I've got one here. Where is it? Our mascot is the bee, because St. Ambrose, 4th century bishop of Milan, doctor of the church, he wrote about the bee, and it is said that his eloquence was so great it was like honey coming from his mouth. So of course the bees would all come and, oh, you get the drill, okay? And we use it, of course. We swarm and we have hives, and anything you can think of, we do it with the bee. But the point here is that that notion that the neighbor is the person we want to be in contact with. When I talk about endowed scholarships, it's not a hard sell at all. And we've tripled them, I think, since I've come, because everybody understands the need for students and their families to get help in attending institutions like ourselves. So some of that, I think, has helped me as I've reached out to others to help us build our endowment. Obviously, we're doing unrestricted giving that we all need, but endowed giving and targeted giving, all of those are pieces of how people can join us in this ministry of Catholic higher education.
So I'm going to pick up on something that you just shared. I thought it was powerful, and you kind of passed over it, but it was an important point when you shared that you were the recipient of a scholarship and that you couldn't have gone to college without that. And as you said, look where you've ended up, right? And you're at your point of retirement. At this point, I'm guessing that you are not done with your life's work, right? Perhaps paid employment.
Certainly pray to God not. Yeah.
And I want to link this idea of, a good deed or an act of generosity that gives someone else an opportunity, and we never know where that would go, and that's your story. And along, I want to link that with this idea that you made, and this is from the audience as well, the point about the Cahokia and Carondelet and this idea of honoring both success and failure. And this person from the audience shared, that it's prompting them to reflect on what are some of their Cahokia moments and some of their Carondelet moments.
Yeah.
But as you think about that, what are the successes that you're most proud of? And the failures perhaps that you've been most informed by and grown from in your career, and as you're at this really important change point in your own life and your career.
Sure. In terms of change point, yeah, I'll stay here for a year. The board has asked me to remain in residence to assist my successor, who's wonderful. She's a perfect fit for us, and I'm thrilled that she and her husband and 8 kids are coming to be the next president of St. Ambrose. Here's a little thing I'd like to put in a parenthesis, though. I think it's important because many of us come out of a history of being a women's college and may still be a women's college today. When I was hired as the 13th president of St. Ambrose in 2007, I was the first woman to be president. And that was a really big deal. And as you would imagine, that was everywhere and blah, 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 blah. And I remember after I got here that one of the first groups I talked to was a group of professional women in the greater Quad Cities. And they asked me all kinds of things. And somebody asked me about being the first woman president of St. Ambrose and blah, blah. And I smiled and I said, here's the thing I have to say to you. I get it. It's a historic moment. We broke a glass ceiling. That's great. But I look forward to the day when we stop using woman as an adjective and just say, she's our next president. And when our next president, our 14th president, so our president-elect, Dr. Amy Novak, was hired, our PR people said to me, oh, we could say this is the second woman. I said, gone. I said, that ceiling was broken. We don't have to do that anymore. We say our next 14th president will be Dr. Amy Novak. She and her husband and her 8 children will come. I said, that's how we talk about it. And so I say that simply because I often think about that when President Obama was elected and we talked about our first African-American president. Won't it be wonderful when all of those words, not because we don't treasure the heritage that women bring or that our African-American or our indigenous people bring, not anything like that, treasuring actually them, cultivating them. We now have our students from a particular cultural backgrounds wear certain stoles at commencement to honor those things. We probably do the same thing. But the point here being that those ceilings, we want them to break so that we stop using those kinds of words. I don't say, for instance, that I have a woman doctor. I have a doctor who happens to be a woman, but I don't even say that anymore. I just say, I love my doctor. She's terrific. Okay. So I don't know why I got off on that. You want me to talk about successes and failures. Let me talk about successes here. I mean, you've heard a bunch of them already. So we raised a lot of money. We built a lot of buildings. Okay, all that stuff. We also put in superb new academic programs that, like our church, meeting the needs of the times, like our religious community, looking out, dividing the city and seeing what needs to be done. For instance, at St. Ambrose, a number of years ago, we put in a wonderful physician assistant graduate program because we're a rural state. And many of our small towns, people might have to drive 60 and 70 miles to get to a doctor. And many of our students coming to be physician assistants look forward to going back to their communities and being the on-site healthcare provider. So those are some of the things I'm very, very proud of. So enough of that. Did we have failure? Sure, we did. Here's one. Try this one on for size. We bought some property. Our diocese, when I was coming, had to declare bankruptcy because of suits in relation to sexual abuse scandals. So that was all on the table when I was coming. So the diocese had to sell all its property and turn it over to the bankruptcy court. That included 44 acres, 3 blocks away from us. Well, think about what we'd love to do with 44 acres 3 blocks away from us. And in fact, the board said to me, as part of the marching orders they gave me when I came, you figure out how to buy that property and develop the athletic fields that we've never had. I mean, I send all my people off to high schools to use their athletic facilities. We just didn't have any. So we did indeed, took a couple of years, but we bought it. And then we wanted to develop it. And the people living right around it made a great stink and said, no, we don't want this to happen. And the mayor of our town, who is a St. Ambrose University alum, we brought our case to the zoning board and they passed it. We brought our case to the city council and they passed it. The mayor vetoed it. And we could not go forward because to override a veto took an almost unanimous vote, which we knew we couldn't get. So there we sat. And for about 48 hours, well, I won't tell you my state of mind, but you can imagine it. And then I said, all right, already, we're going to find a way to deal with this failure. And it was a failure. Okay. And next to that property is a Catholic high school. So I went to them and I said, guess what? Although the city can prevent hospitals and colleges from developing as they wish, state law in Iowa lets high school properties be developed in any way the high school wants. How'd you like to partner with us? And so we sold the property to them. We worked with them. We now have the facilities that we have long needed. But it was one of those long efforts, and it looked like in the end, it was a colossal failure. I still have deep regret that we could not do it in a manner that made sense to all of us. But as you know, you live, you learn, you move on. And are there some interactions with various people over the years? Sure. Some people I have had to let go for a variety of reasons. Those are, I don't consider them failures, but I surely consider them in many ways the fracturing of relationships that I treasured. So those are some of the things, and I could duplicate that in almost any of the 5 institutions that I've had the privilege of serving in, 3 of our own, as you heard, St. Rose, Avila, and Fonfon. And now happy to serve on the board at Mount St. Mary. So all of you could multiply those, and I've got them as well.
Right. The story you told about partnering with the high school reminds me of a similar story about the building of one of our buildings on campus at St. Kate's and the ingenuity and creativity of the sisters in order to move things forward. So I really appreciate your creative thinking there. We just have a couple minutes left, and I just want to invite you. You've brought up the theme of relationships, and as we know, learning is relational and leadership is relational. And I just want to offer you an opportunity for a minute or two to anything you want to share as you're closing out here, keys to relationships and leadership.
I think if you were to say to me, and those who know me from my youth, and there are some people on this call who knew me from the day I entered actually, some of them taught me before I entered. One of the people we lost, our sisters lost, was my 7th and 8th grade teacher. One of our sisters we lost from COVID. So kind of dear to my heart, sadness again. So many of you share things like that. If those who knew me from my youth knew me as I still am, which is, if you put the labels out, a type A, hard driving, get the work done, blah, blah person. Right. Okay. But what I've learned, and it may be the hardest lesson of my life, is that it's far more important to listen than to speak. Now, for a woman whose stock in trade is language, as mine is, spoken and written, to say that is so counterintuitive to who I am.
Yeah.
And yet that's the lesson I've learned. And in those relationship agonies that we all go through before, currently, and in our future, the lesson I've learned is listen first, Joan. Listen first. Not only when there is a challenge of a relationship that appears to be on the rocks or whatever it might be, but more importantly, as a leader. Okay, I'm president of a university. I'm supposed to be the person who stands up at the end and says, folks, here's what we're going to do. And you hope to God it's the right response, right? But what I've learned is when I would first be a leader, I would sit down at the table and I'd say, okay, folks, we got this issue and this is what I think we should do. Bad move, Joan, because all the creative insight of everyone else just goes by the by. There's a person on this thing today who is one of the people who modeled this new behavior, listen first. And that's Marie Joan Harris from the St. Louis province of Carondelet, who was a mentor to me in so many ways when she was vice president of academic affairs at Avila University, and I was her associate dean. To watch her assemble a group of people around her and say, here's the issue, what do you think? And then to watch her listen and bring together all that wisdom and come up with a solution that could carry forward with everybody taking part in it, it just stunned me. I just never seen it before like that. And it taught me that lesson. But if I learned nothing else as a leader, and the advice I'd pass on to any leader is listen more than you talk, and use that plural pronoun, we, so much more than the singular one, I. As I've said to people who've said to me, what's your proudest accomplishment? I always say, here's what I think we did well. Because as I mentor a lot of new presidents, as you would imagine, and I say to them, you know, it's tempting to use I, but nothing you ever accomplish did you do alone. So always say we, except when there's blame to be had, and then stand up and say I, you know, don't throw your people under the bus, stand up and say I. So those are some of the things I think, Sharon, that I would share. And I know on this call are many people from whom I have learned so many of these things. And my hope is that in whatever volunteer ministries I'll be involved in as I go forward, God granting me good health to do so, I will hope to continue learning, because that's the one thing I think we know. We're not done till we're done. And God isn't finished with us till God is finished with us. And then it's a glorious onward forever in the learning of the great beyond.
That's so wonderful. Thank you, Sister Joan. We'll take away those lessons to listen more than we talk and to really use I. There are many messages in the chat thanking you for your thoughts today, and grateful for your leadership and your friendship and your mentorship and the way that that you've inspired everyone today. So I'm going to ask that someone can save that for you so that you'll have that later.